What if the very consensus you rely on for safety is the exact mechanism designed to erase your identity? Society operates on a quiet, pervasive assumption that truth is democratic, that if enough people believe a principle, it becomes reality. We are conditioned to seek the warmth of the herd, trading our unique potential for the comfort of collective approval. But history's most profound breakthroughs never emerged from a committee. They were forged in the crucible of isolation by those willing to become the exception. In the cobblestone streets of 19th century Denmark, a solitary figure named Søren Kierkegaard observed a society drowning in its own complacency. He watched his contemporaries glide through life, adopting a comfortable, institutionalized faith that required absolutely nothing of their inner selves. The church and the state had merged into a monolithic entity, dispensing a pre-packaged morality that insulated individuals from the terrifying burden of actual thought. Kierkegaard recognized this collective thought not as a triumph of civilization, but as a spiritual anesthetic. To live in such a world is to experience a profound internal fracture. You might recognize this feeling today as cognitive dissonance, the psychological tension that arises when your deeply held personal beliefs clash directly with the behaviors demanded by your environment. You sense that the path laid out before you is hollow, yet the pressure to conform is immense. The mind rationalizes the surrender, whispering that it is better to be wrong with the majority than right in absolute solitude. To shatter this illusion, Kierkegaard laid the chaotic groundwork for existentialism, a philosophical movement emphasizing individual existence, absolute freedom, and the inescapable weight of personal choice. He argued that human beings are not mere cogs in a cosmic or societal machine, but conscious entities condemned to be free. This was a radical rejection of the era's dominant philosophies, which sought to explain away human suffering through grand, objective systems of logic. For Kierkegaard, objective systems were a coward's refuge from the messy, subjective reality of living. That ancient rebellion against the system remains fiercely relevant. When you sit in a boardroom, scroll through curated digital feeds, or navigate the unspoken rules of your social circle, the same invisible pressure demands your compliance. You are asked to outsource your morality, your ambition, and your very identity to the prevailing trends. But authentic purpose cannot be downloaded or inherited. It must be excavated from the bedrock of your own lived experience, often at the cost of your social comfort. The Danish philosopher did not merely critique this dynamic from a safe distance. He weaponized his intellect against the very institutions that sustained his society. He published relentless, pseudonymous attacks on the established church, challenging the lazy assumptions of his peers. He demanded to know how one could claim to hold a profound, life-altering belief while living a life completely devoid of passion, risk, or sacrifice. His words were a mirror held up to a society that refused to look at its own reflection. True mastery of your destiny requires you to redefine what victory actually looks like. Success is rarely the accumulation of accolades or the seamless integration into a prestigious hierarchy. Instead, it is the quiet, unyielding commitment to your own subjective truth. It is the willingness to stand in the center of your life and declare that you will not be a passive participant in your own existence. This level of self-leadership demands a ruthless honesty that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Facing that honesty introduces a terrifying companion to your journey, the anguish of absolute freedom. When you strip away the excuses provided by society, your family, or your circumstances, you are left staring into the abyss of your own potential. Every choice becomes entirely your own. If you fail, there is no one left to blame. This staggering weight of individual responsibility is enough to drive many back into the numbing embrace of the crowd, where expectations are low and failure is shared. Navigating this abyss often requires what modern psychology calls shadow work, the deliberate practice of uncovering and integrating the hidden, repressed, or socially unacceptable parts of your personality to achieve true wholeness. Kierkegaard understood this intuitively, recognizing that we hide our deepest fears and most profound desires behind a mask of societal respectability. To find your authentic self, you must first be willing to confront the darkness you have buried to keep the peace with those around you. The ultimate resolution to this internal war is what Kierkegaard famously termed the leap of faith. This is not a blind, irrational jump into ignorance, but a conscious, passionate commitment to a truth that transcends rational understanding or objective proof. It is the moment you decide to trust your inner conviction over the overwhelming evidence of the status quo. The leap is terrifying precisely because it offers no guarantees, no safety nets, and no empirical data to assure you of a soft landing. That singular leap redefined the boundaries of human courage. It suggested that the highest form of living is not found in intellectual certainty, but in the willingness to risk everything on a deeply personal truth. When a person makes this commitment, they become dangerous to the established order. They can no longer be manipulated by the promise of societal reward or the threat of collective exile, because their foundation is built on something the crowd cannot touch. Look closely at the compromises you make every single day. Where are you diluting your ambition to avoid making others uncomfortable? Where are you silencing your own voice because the truth you hold might fracture a convenient relationship? The path of the renegade noble begins with the painful acknowledgement of these small betrayals. You cannot forge an authentic legacy while simultaneously seeking permission from people who are terrified of their own shadows. The friction between who you are and who the world wants you to be will generate intense heat. You will face moments of profound isolation where the silence of your own company feels deafening. Friends may distance themselves, confused by your sudden refusal to play the games they have built their lives around. This isolation is not a punishment for your rebellion. It is the necessary clearing of the brush so that the towering tree of your individuality can finally take root. To survive this clearing, one might draw upon Stoicism, the ancient Greco-Roman philosophy of enduring hardship without complaint, focusing entirely on internal mastery while remaining indifferent to external chaos. While Kierkegaard championed passionate subjectivity and the Stoics favored rational detachment, both philosophies converge on a critical axis: the absolute sovereignty of the individual mind. By combining the passionate leap of the existentialist with the impenetrable resilience of the Stoic, you forge an armor that societal judgment cannot pierce. Armed with this resilience, your definition of impact fundamentally shifts. You no longer measure your worth by how effectively you can echo the prevailing sentiments of the era. Instead, your value is derived from your capacity to introduce friction into a frictionless system. You become the obstacle that forces the river of collective thought to change its course. This is the hallmark of visionary resolve, the ability to hold a frequency so pure that the world is forced to tune itself to you. Kierkegaard lived this reality until his dying breath. He exhausted his inheritance and his physical health to self-publish his massive body of work, knowing full well that his contemporaries would largely mock or ignore him. He walked the streets of Copenhagen, engaging in intense debates, enduring public caricatures in the local papers, and refusing to back down from his assertion that the institutional church was a fraud. He chose the agony of truth over the anesthesia of belonging. The immediate consequence of his defiance was marginalization. The collective machinery of 19th century Denmark attempted to crush his influence by labeling him an eccentric malcontent. Yet, the echoes of his stoic resolve followed long after the institutions that mocked him crumbled into historical obscurity. Because he refused to compromise his subjective truth for objective popularity, his ideas eventually became the cornerstone of modern existential thought, influencing generations of rebels, artists, and thinkers who dared to stand alone. As Kierkegaard famously noted, truth is not something you merely observe, it is something you must live. He wrote that the crucial thing is to find a truth which is true for me, to find the idea for which I can live and die. This concept obliterates the modern obsession with universal life hacks and generic blueprints for success. Your truth is entirely proprietary. It cannot be outsourced to a mentor, a guru, or an algorithm. You are standing at the precipice of your own monumental decision. The crowd is behind you, offering a warm, well-lit path to mediocrity. They promise you a life free from the terrifying burden of authentic choice, provided you simply surrender your uniqueness at the door. But you feel the pull of the void in front of you, the dark, uncharted territory of your own immense potential. The question is not whether you are capable of the leap, but whether you can endure the vertigo. The breakthrough arrives the moment you realize the crowd is untruth. The consensus is always a compromise, a lowest common denominator designed to offend no one and inspire nothing. When you finally detach your self-worth from the collective gaze, a massive reservoir of energy is released. The cognitive dissonance evaporates. You are no longer fighting a war on two fronts, trying to appease the world while satisfying your soul. You are finally unified, dangerous, and entirely free. This timeless rebellion is more critical now than ever before. We live in an age of hyper-connectivity, where the pressure to conform is broadcast into our minds every waking second. The digital crowd is louder, faster, and more ruthless than the citizens of Copenhagen ever were. To maintain your sovereignty in this environment requires a daily, deliberate act of defiance. It requires you to build an internal fortress of conviction that no algorithm can decode and no trend can dismantle. Forging an authentic legacy means accepting that your path will be misunderstood by those who have never dared to leave the herd. You must become comfortable being the villain in the stories of people who are terrified of their own unlived lives. Your unapologetic pursuit of personal mastery will trigger their deepest insecurities. Let it. Your responsibility is not to manage their emotional reactions, but to fiercely protect the sacred flame of your own individual purpose. The challenge has been laid before you. The philosophy of individual truth is not a historical curiosity. It is a present-day mandate for anyone who refuses to die as a copy. Embrace the anguish of your freedom. Confront the shadows you have hidden to keep the peace. Step to the edge of your own existence. Look into the terrifying expanse of what you could become and take the leap. Master your destiny and force the world to adapt to the renegade you truly are.